This is your fault, Liam. You broke the entire platform.
If I broke it, it wouldn't be protecting itself right now.
At first, I thought the silence in the conference room meant I was early. Then, I saw every executive already seated, eyes fixed on me as if I'd walked into the wrong meeting. The glass walls shimmered with the reflection of cold, white lights, and my presentation file felt suddenly heavy in my hand. I had built this system, shaped every workflow they depended on, yet something in the air told me that none of that mattered now. Miles Hartman, the CEO's son, pushed back his chair with theatrical impatience. He crossed his arms, tilted his chin, and gave me a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You're no longer a fit here," he said. "Effective immediately, you're fired." For a second. The words didn't land. They hovered in the air like a misfired command. When they finally hit, they hit hard, sharp, disorienting, humiliating. A few executives looked down at the table. Others looked away entirely. Not one person stood up for me. Not one voice questioned him. And if you've ever faced a moment that left you standing alone like that, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Your comments and support mean more than you think, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe so our team can keep bringing these stories to life. Miles pointed at the door as if swatting away an inconvenience. "Leave your laptop and go." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Shock numbed everything: my hands, my thoughts, even my sense of balance. I closed my laptop with a soft click that sounded louder than the whole room. Then I lifted it, because handing it over in silence felt like the last piece of dignity I had left. And I walked toward the door while their eyes followed me like I was already a ghost. The hallway outside felt colder than the room I had just escaped. I hadn't even processed what had happened when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. A young engineer, Oliver, grabbed my arm, his breathing unsteady. "Liam, wait," he whispered, eyes wide with something worse than shock. "Miles doesn't know. You're the only certified operator on the entire system." For a heartbeat, everything inside me froze. His words cut through the numbness with the precision of glass against skin, sharp, cold, dangerous. I blinked at him, unable to respond. I'd just been fired in front of everyone, and now I knew something they didn't. Something that would break them before the day was over. The wind hit me the moment I stepped outside the building, tugging at my thin suit jacket like it wanted to pull me farther away from everything I had just lost. I walked across the concrete courtyard in a daze, each step slower than the last, until I reached the old stone bench I had sat on during so many late-night crises. I placed my half-finished coffee beside me. It had gone cold, flat, almost bitter, an easy mirror of the way I felt inside. For a long moment, I simply stared at it, letting the numbness settle into my bones. Eventually, muscle memory pushed my hand into my pocket, retrieving the small personal device I always carried. The screen lit up, and a flood of system alerts washed across it in harsh red. Then, one message expanded across the top: steady and merciless primary operator removed, triggering risk-protected mode. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I had built that safeguard with my own hands, line by line, protocol by protocol, specifically to prevent reckless decisions from tearing the system apart. And now the company had triggered it themselves without even knowing what they'd done. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't an attack. It was the system doing exactly what I designed it to do when the wrong person touched the wrong authority. A slow, controlled breath left my lungs as the truth settled deeper. 8 years. That was how long I had served as chief systems architect. 8 years designing the fulfillment routing engine that kept millions of packages moving. 8 years refining the fraud detection AI, the vendor trust network, the payment clearance flow. I had guided entire engineering teams through 2 national-level outages, sleeping on the floor beside overheating servers, stitching the platform back together while the world panicked. Even now, a faint scar on my wrist burned at the memory of one brutal 48-hour shift. Yet none of that had mattered to the people who dismissed me. The device buzzed again. More alerts cascaded down, but one message glowed brighter than all the rest, as if the system itself was whispering a truth the company had never bothered to learn. New operator. None, no replacement, no backup, no authorized personnel. I closed my eyes as a tight wave of betrayal pressed into my chest. They had pushed me out like I was nothing more than a replaceable part, but the architecture I built refused to pretend otherwise. Beneath the numb calm, something sharper began to rise, anger held in a firm grip, not wild or impulsive, but focused, clarifying, necessary. They thought firing me was the end of the story. But the system knew better, and soon, they would too. By noon, the first signs of collapse reached me through a stream of frantic messages that lit up my phone like a slow-motion alarm. I was sitting in a small cafe tucked beside the transit station, my cappuccino still steaming in front of me, untouched, as if it belonged to someone whose world hadn't just tilted off its axis. One former teammate wrote that the northern warehouse was receiving orders meant for the southern region, a routing disaster that should have been impossible under the architecture I built. Another message followed, reporting that payment processing was stuck in 18-minute pending cycles, long enough to trigger customer complaints and automated risk flags. Then came the worst update, the fraud detection AI. The same engine I had fine-tuned over years of night shifts and system audits had failed to initialize. I leaned back in my chair, letting the rising tension settle across my shoulders like a weight I recognized all too well. It was happening exactly the way the system would behave when stripped of a certified operator, chaotic, confused, and blind. Still, I kept my emotions locked down, holding the cold, steady understanding that this was not revenge and not malfunction. This was simply validation, the architecture doing what it had always been designed to do when the wrong hands tried to steer it. My phone rang then, the vibration sharp against the wooden table. It was a vendor I'd worked with for years, someone who trusted the system only because he trusted me. "Liam," he said, voice tight. "You're not there anymore. Are you the platform's losing control?" I stared at the swirling foam in my cup, letting his question hang before answering, with a calmness that surprised even me. "I'm not there," I said quietly, "and things will get worse before they get better." He exhaled shakily, and I could hear the tension crackling behind his silence. But the real shock came a few minutes later, when a blast of messages from multiple vendors hit at once. One of the largest sellers on the platform had announced an immediate suspension of all activity, shifting its entire traffic flow to a rival marketplace. The notifications spread like wildfire, rippling across internal channels, vendor groups, and customer forums before the company even realized what had happened. I watched each update arrive with a detached clarity, the kind that grows from knowing you warned them for years that the system needed proper oversight. Now it was proving the point on its own. The tension rising in my chest didn't feel like fear. It felt like confirmation, cold and precise. The architecture was speaking in the only language it had left, and every failure echoed the truth they never bothered to understand. This was only the first shockwave, and I knew the next ones would hit even harder, and it was only getting started. For real. The messages from vendors started early in the morning, appearing one after another in a relentless stream that turned my phone into a vibrating reminder of everything the company had broken. At first, I tried to respond with polite, restrained explanations, but as the hours passed, the tone of the messages shifted. Questions became accusations, concern became frustration, and frustration became something sharper. They had heard how I was fired. They had seen how the system behaved without oversight, and now they wanted answers no one inside the company could give them. By noon, the pressure felt like a physical force tightening around my chest. I stood outside a busy shopping center, the kind where the noise of traffic and conversation usually blended into a harmless background hum. Today, it only made me feel more isolated. People passed by in every direction, laughing, talking, carrying bags, but none of them had any idea that an entire digital marketplace was spiraling into chaos only a few blocks away. I watched them move with an ease that felt foreign to me, the contrast sharpening my sense of loneliness until it bordered on pain. More messages rolled in. A mid-sized electronics vendor sent screenshots showing order mismatches that had cost him thousands in refunds. A cosmetics supplier wrote that her customer complaints had tripled in just 2 hours. Another vendor, one I had personally onboarded years ago, simply asked, "Why would they treat you like this?" That one stung more than I expected, not because of the sympathy, but because of the moral weight behind it. These people trusted me more than they trusted the company. They always had. By late afternoon, the numbers began to surface, actual revenue figures that showed just how quickly things were deteriorating. The company had lost an enormous percentage of its daily volume, and the chart kept dipping lower every hour. I stared at the report one vendor forwarded to me. feeling a cold anger rise beneath my calm exterior. Not rage, not vindictive satisfaction, just the deep moral frustration of watching them suffer because of a decision made by someone who had never spent a single night keeping the system alive. As the sun dropped behind the office towers, turning the sidewalk gold, my email pinged again. But this time, it wasn't a complaint from one vendor, it was a message signed by 47 of the largest sellers on the platform. Their wording was direct, united, and unmistakably final. No Liam, no cooperation. I read it twice, then a third time. Feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't triumph. It was the realization that the company hadn't just fired an employee, they had severed the trust of the people who kept their marketplace alive. And now those people were speaking with one voice, a voice the company could no longer ignore. By the time the board of directors assembled, the tension in the building had already thickened into something almost physical. Word of plummeting revenue, halted vendors, and system-wide glitches had reached every executive floor, and the usual polished confidence of the leadership team had been replaced by sharp whispers and nervous pacing. I wasn't in the room, of course, but the updates given to me by former coworkers painted the picture clearly enough. Something inside that boardroom was breaking, and for once, it wasn't the system, it was them. The meeting began with raised voices demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding someone to blame when the CTO finally stood. His hands were trembling so visibly that even the most oblivious board members couldn't ignore it. He cleared his throat, hesitated, then began admitting what he had hidden for years behind technical jargon and quiet panic. Risk mode, he said, breath uneven, was triggered automatically due to the removal of the primary certified operator. A silence fell so abruptly that even through second-hand retellings, I could imagine the room freezing. Someone asked who the certified operator was, clearly assuming it would be one of the senior engineers or managers still employed. The CTO swallowed hard before answering. There is only one certified operator, and it was Liam Cross. The impact was immediate. One board member reportedly slammed a binder onto the table, papers scattering like a burst of white feathers. Another leaned back in his chair as if trying to process a blow to the chest. Someone else muttered something about liability, compliance failure, and unbelievable negligence. The dread in the room had shifted from confusion to something far darker: recognition. They had fired the one person legally authorized to keep the platform's core systems running. They had removed the only name listed on international operational certifications, the same certifications required by law and by every financial partner that processed transactions through the platform. Then came the moment that turned panic into outright fear. A ping echoed through the boardroom speakers, an automated alert projected onto the conference screen. The message came from the payment processor that handled nearly all of the company's daily transactions. If a certified operator does not log in within the next 24 hours, the payment system will be suspended in compliance with federal standards. Silence followed. Real silence, heavy, suffocating, final. Losing orders was a crisis, losing vendors was a warning, but losing the ability to process payments, that was death. I could almost feel the dread spreading across that room as the truth finally pierced their denial. They hadn't just fired me. They had unplugged the heart of their entire operation, and the countdown had already begun. They told me later that the board summoned Miles Hartman with the same tone they used for compliance violations and federal audits: sharp, cold, and unmistakably serious, even from a distance. I could imagine his swagger fading the moment he stepped into that room. Miles had always moved like the building belonged to him, like every corridor, every office, every employee existed to orbit his importance. But arrogance doesn't survive well under fluorescent lights in a semicircle of furious directors. He walked in late, breathing hard, sweat already beating at his temples, his usual confidence the chin up, the shoulders back. The smirk crumbled the second he saw the stack of printed reports scattered across the glossy table, charts showing collapsing revenue, vendor withdrawals, system failures, and at the top, the risk mode alert he'd unknowingly triggered. The chairman didn't bother with pleasantries. "Explain yourself," he said. Miles opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a man trying to remember how breathing worked. "Liam, he was just a systems engineer," he stammered. "We have plenty of those." He wasn't critical. The CTO, normally a gentle conflict-avoiding man, slammed a folder shut so loudly the sound echoed across the room. "Just an engineer," he repeated, voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "You fired the only certified operator on the entire platform." Miles blinked rapidly, eyes flicking between the faces in front of him. "I didn't know," he muttered weakly. "No one told me." One of the board members stood, holding a document high enough for everyone to see. The paper shook in his hand, not from fear, but from disbelief. "We didn't need to tell you. It's written right here. International Certification for High-Risk Operational Control." He tossed the document onto the table in front of Miles. "Look at the name on it." Miles leaned in. His face went white. "Liam Cross," he whispered. Another board member, the one known for tearing apart failing departments, leaned forward. His voice was low, sharp, and merciless. "You didn't fire an engineer," he said. "You fired the only person legally authorized to keep this platform running." The room froze. The temperature dropped. Every remaining ounce of ego drained from Miles' posture. His shoulders sagged, his eyes glassed over, and he reached blindly for the back of a chair as if the truth had knocked the balance out of him. He tried again, voice cracking. I thought he was slowing us down." "No," the chairman snapped. "You slowed us down. You endangered the entire company." Silence followed, thick, final, unbroken. Then came the words that shattered any last piece of his arrogance. "No one here will defend you." Miles looked around the room, desperate for even one ally. Not a single hand moved, not a single face softened, for the first time since he walked into the company. Miles Hartman finally understood fear, real fear, the kind that comes when the power you took for granted collapses under the weight of your own ignorance. The call came just after sunset, long enough into the evening that the city outside my apartment window had settled into a quieter rhythm. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, reviewing the latest stream of system alerts on my personal device. When my phone buzzed with a number I recognized instantly. It was the CEO. For a moment, I simply watched the screen light up, letting the vibration pulse against the wood. After everything that had happened, the firing, the fallout, the vendors. It was almost surreal that he would dial my number himself. Finally, I answered, but I didn't say a word. On the other end, I heard the familiar strain in his breath, the kind of hesitation that only appears when a leader realizes he has lost control. "Liam," he began, voice low. We may have misjudged the situation." He paused, likely expecting reassurance, some sign that I would ease the tension he had created. I stayed silent. The ceiling fan above me turned in slow circles, stirring the warm air while the yellow lamp beside the couch cast long shadows across the uneven walls. He cleared his throat. "The board wants to request your assistance. We need you to return temporarily to stabilize operations." I let his words hang in the air, giving them no anchor, no reaction he could hold on to. For the first time since the day I joined the company, the balance of power had shifted completely, and he knew it. The silence between us stretched long enough for him to inhale sharply, as if bracing for whatever I might say. But the truth was, I didn't feel anger anymore. What I felt was control, cold and deliberate. They had cast me out without hesitation, and now they were the ones standing at the edge of a cliff they built themselves. I finally spoke, keeping my voice steady and distant. "Before I consider anything," I said calmly, "you will provide a written directive from the board. Full signatures, clear terms, no verbal agreements." There was a sharp inhale on his end, followed by the faint murmur of voices others in the room. Listening, realizing the ground rules had changed, he tried to soften his tone, offering apologies, explanations, even hints of respect he had never shown me before. None of it moved me. I looked around my small apartment, the coffee table scarred from years of late-night work sessions, the outdated fan clicking as it rotated, and felt an unexpected certainty settle in. They needed me more than they understood, and I owed them nothing but boundaries. I waited for him to respond. But for once, he had no commands, no condescension, no false confidence to lean on, only silence. In that quiet, I realized the shift was complete. I was no longer the dismissed employee scrambling for stability they were, and as the ceiling fan hummed above me, I let the silence stretch a few seconds more before ending the call myself. They would send the document, they would follow the rules, because now they finally understood who held the authority in this moment today, when Risk Mode Level 3 activated. The system didn't scream or flash warnings the way most executives always assumed it would. Instead, it shut down with the cold precision of a vault door closing slow, final, irreversible. I watched the alerts appear on my personal device, each one a quiet confirmation that the architecture was behaving exactly as I designed it to. Payment processing suspended. Fulfillment and warehousing interfaces dropped instantly into read-only. The automation layer of the AI routing, fraud checks, dynamic pricing went dark in a single sweep. No panic in the code, no glitches, just a deliberate lockdown. By the time I looked up from the screen, the city outside my apartment window had shifted into its nighttime rhythm. Traffic lights blinked across the intersections below, and office buildings flickered with scattered floors still lit by exhausted employees trying to contain a disaster they didn't understand. I stood there in the dim glow of my minimal apartment, watching it all with a sense of triumphant tension tightening behind my ribs. The system wasn't collapsing out of failure. It was protecting itself in the absence of its certified operator, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't the one holding it together. They were the ones desperate for control. My phone buzzed with frantic messages, engineers begging for guidance, managers pleading for temporary workarounds, executives scrambling for any sign of stability. I answered none of them. My silence wasn't revenge, it was restraint, controlled dominance. I had spent years warning the leadership about compliance, about proper certification procedures, about the risks of ignoring the architecture's safety protocols. They dismissed every caution, and now the consequences were unfolding exactly the way the documentation spelled out. I leaned one shoulder against the cool window frame and looked down at the blurred glow of headlights weaving across the streets. Even from this distance, I could sense the panic spreading inside the company's headquarters. They would attempt every shortcut, force restart modules, overload backup processes, bypass fail-safes, but nothing would budge without a certified operator's authentication. The architecture's spine was locked, and only one person had the authority to unlock it. That truth landed harder than any act of retaliation ever could. My laptop chimed softly. A new notification appeared, one that made the tension in my chest shift into something sharper, quieter, undeniably powerful. It wasn't from the company. It wasn't from a vendor. It was from an international regulatory body. We are awaiting your authorization to restore operational permissions to the system. The message read, "Please confirm your availability as the sole certified operator of record." I stared at the text for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle fully. They weren't asking the company. They weren't requesting the CEO's approval. They were asking me. I straightened, feeling the balance of power lock firmly into place. The platform's fate no longer rested in the hands of the people who fired me. It rested in mine. The final board meeting began under fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, as if even the ceiling could sense the fracture spreading through the company's foundation. I wasn't in the room, but the people who related to me afterward spoke with the same shaken intensity, like witnesses to a controlled burn that nearly turned into a wildfire. By the time the directors took their seats, the crisis had reached a breaking point. Risk mode level 3 was still active. Payments remained frozen. Vendors were bleeding traffic to competitors, and the truth about who caused it all had finally settled in like a heavy, undeniable weight. The chairman opened the meeting with a tone colder than the glass walls surrounding them. "This situation is a direct result of catastrophic leadership failure," he said, fixing his gaze on the CEO first. The words landed like hammer strokes, measured, deliberate, inescapable. The CEO tried to defend himself, stumbling through excuses about miscommunication, operational oversight, and delegation. But the board wasn't having it. His voice, once authoritative, cracked under the pressure. Every failed system, every lost vendor, every hour of downtime was laid at his doorstep. Then came the moment everyone knew was inevitable. "Miles," the chairman said sharply, "step forward." Miles Hartman stood, or tried to. His legs were unsteady, his confidence drained. The arrogance that had fueled his decision to fire me only days earlier had vanished completely, replaced by a pale panic that left him gripping the edge of the table. His father, the CEO, didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The board had taken control now. "You knowingly terminated the only certified operator on the platform," a director said, pointing to the documents spread across the table. "Your ignorance created a compliance breach of international scale." Miles opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Someone else spoke before he had the chance to fabricate another excuse. You compromised our vendors, our partners, our financial systems, and our public reputation, another board member added. Your decision cost us millions in a single day. The CTO, usually timid in these meetings, leaned forward with an intensity that startled the rest of the room, and he ignored every warning I've ever given about certification protocols. He said, he didn't ask, he didn't check, he didn't care. It was the breaking point. The chairman raised his hand. All those in favor of removing Miles Hartman from all operational authority, effective immediately, one by one. Hands went up. Every single one. The CEO didn't vote. He simply lowered his head as his son's career collapsed in front of him. The vote was unanimous. Miles was stripped of every power he held, his badge, his authority, his illusion of importance gone. Silence followed, thick and heavy. But it wasn't over. A woman on the far end of the table, someone who had spent years quietly observing, rarely speaking, lifted a folder and tapped it against the table. We need stability, she said plainly. We need someone who understands the architecture, the compliance, the vendors, someone this platform will actually follow. She looked around the room, then delivered the line that would reshape everything that happened next. Liam needs to be appointed to a strategic oversight position. The room didn't argue. For the first time, the directors weren't just reacting to crisis, they were choosing a future. And that future had my name written all over it. I walked back into the company headquarters the next morning. Not as the man they had dismissed, but as the senior operations advisor appointed directly by the board. The security guard who once watched me leave in silence straightened immediately, greeting me with a respect that hadn't existed before, for the first time in days. My steps felt steady, unburdened by humiliation. I wasn't returning to reclaim a job. I was returning to restore the system that should never have been jeopardized in the first place. Inside the operations command room, every screen displayed the same frozen warning, Risk Mode Level 3 active. Engineers stood scattered across the floor, their exhaustion unmistakable, their relief unmistakable as I approached. No one questioned my presence. No one doubted why I was there. I sat at the console, entered my credentials, and the system recognized me instantly the way a locked door recognizes the right key. One confirmation, one authorization. And the lockdown began to dissolve. Modules rebooted, payment channels reconnected, warehouses shifted from read-only to full capacity within minutes. Messages arrived almost immediately. Vendors thanked me for stabilizing their orders. A few apologized for not speaking sooner. Others simply wrote, "Glad you're back." Even the junior engineers, usually too nervous to make eye contact, approached with quiet appreciation. They bowed their heads slightly, a gesture that carried more weight than any title the board had assigned. And for the first time since that humiliating meeting, pride rose in me without bitterness. Not pride in authority, but in the architecture I had built, the architecture that endured. I was packing my notes when my personal device pinged with a message unlike any other. It came from a federal agency responsible for national digital commerce. Their wording was formal, direct, unmistakably consequential. "We request your leadership in restructuring the country's e-commerce infrastructure." I reread it slowly, letting the symmetry of the moment settle. They hadn't contacted the company. They had contacted me. That was when everything became clear. I hadn't returned to be part of their hierarchy again. I had returned to rise beyond it, to build something larger, stronger, and smarter than the system they mishandled. Walking out of the building, I didn't feel like someone who had been fired. I felt like someone whose real work was finally beginning. When I walked out of that building the first time, I thought losing my place meant losing my purpose. But standing on the other side of everything, I learned something far more powerful. Your worth isn't defined by who fires you, it's revealed by what collapses without you. If my story reminds you of a moment you survived in silence, tell me. Where are you listening from right now? I'd love to hear your voice in the comments. And if this journey spoke to you, tap like, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe so we can keep building stories of strength together.